Hey all, Ron Coddington here from Military Images on a humid and somewhat rainy, cloudy day here at Arlington National Cemetery. I make a quarterly trek here to take a photograph of a gravestone for someone, the subject of our feature called Hallowed Ground that appears in the magazine, and it is the story and images of a soldier or sailor who was buried at Arlington National Cemetery. And so I'm here today keeping my voice down because this is a cemetery and it's a place of respect and a place of quiet reflection. I'm up here in section 1, which is largely occupied by Civil War veterans. It's definitely off the beaten trail. The most activity is happening on the other end of the cemetery, closer to the visitor center, where you have more recent burials. So here, in the relative solitude, there's nobody around me. The occasional plane coming in to Reagan National, but that's about it right now. It's also a bit of a walk from the visitor center, so I see some perspiration. That's why, a lot of uphill walking. So I'm here, and the individual that I came to visit is right behind me on this stone. This is Edward Bancroft Williston, and I just spent the last couple of days getting to know him and getting to know his Civil War story. And what I found was really quite remarkable. He was a graduate of Norwich University. For those of you who are not familiar, Norwich was a prominent military school and still is. I found one reference to the school as being about the best in the north, and comparing it to VMI in the south. Whether or not that comparison is true, I'll leave it to alumni and other historians to figure out. At any rate, Williston graduated and went on to join the 2nd U.S. Artillery. And when the war began, he was out in California and came back to participate in active operations in the Eastern Theater. So early on, he establishes his reputation as a daring soldier, a daring artillerist, and starts getting brevets for various engagements that he's involved in. My special interest, and the reason that we're featuring him, is for his actions at Trevilian Station in June of 1864. And if you know of that battle, you know it was part of a larger action, a raid that was conducted by Major General Phil Sheridan and his cavalry, trying to loop around, cross the James, and link up with Major General David Hunter's army in Charlottesville. That didn't quite go according to plan. The Confederates weren't really interested in having that happen. Long story short, there's a big fight at Trevilian Station, and South Carolina troops under Wade Hampton are pretty much smashing up the cavalry, and they call in the general in charge of Union forces, calls in the reserves, and that's where Williston and his 2nd U.S. Artillery come into play. As you might imagine, there's a lot of movement happening, a lot of quick action to be able to mobilize the reserves. Lines of skirmishers are being formed, and in one of those lines of skirmishers is a 12-pounder brass cannon. Now, think about that for a second. There's a line of skirmishes forming, and there's a cannon in the middle of all this. And as that skirmish line is moving forward, the crew of that cannon is keeping pace with the advancing line. That's a fairly innovative, it's not the first time that has happened. I can recall at least one incident a couple years earlier down in New Bern, North Carolina. But that's a story for another day. In this instance at Trevilian Station, that cannon, that brass 12-pounder, is rolling along. There's a crew that's moving it, obviously. It's not going to move by itself. And the officer in charge of that gun is, you guessed it, it's the guy behind me here, who was then a Lieutenant Williston. So as that line is moving forward, the commanders on the ground, they realize the potential for the skirmish line reinforced by a cannon. They're moving pretty quickly, and they're pausing along the way. And Williston himself is pulling the lanyard, and they are firing a double-shot canister at the oncoming Confederate troops. This is pretty serious business. Double shots of canister is hurling a lot of lead. And according to Union reports, I should say, it's doing some heavy damage. Long story short, Williston continues, the skirmish line continues, they're up front. They managed to slow down the advance of the Confederates on this section of the battlefield. And when it's all over at the end of the day, the Confederates might have had a serious breakthrough that could have done incredible damage to Union cavalry and other forces that day. However, it was not meant to be. The Confederates deserve credit for repelling the attack and stopping Sheridan's larger mission that he wanted to accomplish. However, the Union forces on the ground staved off a potentially larger defeat. And so Williston certainly gets some credit. The commander on the field, Wesley Merritt, a name that you might know, writes something to the effect in his general report, the 12-pounders, the little 12-pounders were magnificent that day. And then he goes on to compliment Williston. So he gets another brevet, he ends the war. Williston gets another brevet, he gets a fourth brevet, he ends the war as a captain, goes on into the regular army, and has a long and distinguished career, all the way up to the war with Spain and into the Philippines. By that time, Williston is in his probably in his late 50s, and as he is in Cuba and in the Philippines, one of the generals who is there with him is Wesley Merritt, who wrote about him at Trevilian Station. So I like to think about the fact that, did these two guys cross paths? And if they did in Cuba or the Philippines, did they chat about 1864 and Trevilian Station? If they did, I have no record of it. It's just pure fancy on my part. Something fun to think about, something I was thinking about while I was writing Williston's story. Couldn't find any evidence of it, but it was an interesting rabbit hole to go down. Long story short, at this point, he retires and in the early 1900s and lives until 1920. And there's a large funeral, and he's buried right behind me, as you see here. His young wife lives into World War II. By the way, General Merritt, Wesley Merritt, he died in 1910, so Williston outlived him by 10 years. So, this concludes my story. More than a story, really. It's a tribute to Lieutenant, later Captain, and finally, as you can read on a stone, Brigadier General Williston. So, remembering him on this day and thinking about that long ago day on June 24th, 1864, on Trevilian Station, at Trevilian Station, when then Lieutenant Williston was rolling with his 12-pounder brass cannon and firing double shots of canister. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned. This is the Military Images Facebook page, And I'll be back next quarter with another story. If you don't want to wait that long, and check out militaryimagesmagazine.com. Pick up a subscription if you don't subscribe. If you do, I appreciate your support. Take care. Have a great afternoon.